We are good to go. So again, happy Friday to everyone. My name is Debbie Clare. I'm the Executive Marketing Manager for McGraw-Hill's Management Portfolio, and I am thrilled to have you joining us today. I'm thrilled to have, in particular, Frank Rothaermel here to talk to you about Black Swans and strategy. Now, Frank is a professor of strategy and innovation. He holds the Russell and Nancy McDonough Chair in the Scheller College of Business at the Georgia Institute of Technology and is an Alfred P. Salone Industries Studies Fellow. He is the recipient of a National Science Foundation Career Award, which offers the National Science Foundation's most prestigious awards. Bloomsburg Business Week named Frank one of Georgia Tech's prominent faculty, while Poets and Quants selected Frank as one of the favorite business school professors. Frank is the author of McGraw-Hill's market-leading product, Strategic Management, currently in the 5th edition with Greek, Korean, Mandarin, and Spanish translations. Frank has authored 23 most popular case studies distributed by Harvard Business Publishing. Frank also received numerous teaching awards for excellence in the classroom, including Georgia Tech-wide Professor of Excellence Award. So I'm thrilled to have him joining us for our session today. But before we get started, I'd actually like to pose a few polling questions to kickstart our session. So our first polling question is, how are you currently teaching? We'll give it about 10 more seconds. All right. Oh, share the results. It looks like hybrid wins out at about 50%, and then residential 12%, and online only 38%. Let's also now look at our second poll question. Have you changed the content of your course because of the COVID-19 pandemic? All right, last responses. Okay. And the results show about 39% said yes, 54% said no, and 7% says, I'm thinking about it. It's always good to start with some polling questions because this will help facilitate some of the discussion ahead based on what Frank has planned for you. So Frank, take it away.
Thank you, Debbie. Debbie, thank you. Would you please confirm you can all hear me okay?
All good.
Good. Thank you, Debbie, for this kind introduction, and thank you, Natalie, for putting on this workshop today. I'd also like to thank our friends, other friends at McGraw-Hill who are on the call. And most importantly, I'd like to thank the attendees for taking time out of their busy schedules to be here today to speak with us about Black Swan strategy. Let me begin with a quick story, how I got started on this journey, thinking more deeply about Black Swans and strategy. Last spring, when COVID started and we shut down at universities in the United States, at the end, we turned around on a dime, moving from residential to online only for a time being. And as the spring semester ended, I received many emails from my students struggling with job losses, internship losses, current students, internship offers withdrawn, job offers withdrawn, and so forth. So for them, it was definitely a big shock in the Black Swan, and they were really in crisis. And they asked me whether I could help them make sense of this, and if I would put a lecture together to speak about this. And I said I would be happy to do it. And at this point, I had like 85 students in that particular section, and 85 students across 2 sections, I guess. And I figured like 3 to 5 students probably will show up, like office hours. All the students came, so it's quite interesting. I even got an email afterwards from a student saying that their parents listened in and really enjoyed the content. So I've taken it from here. This is basic content I developed based on student requests, how to make sense of the current situation, and how to think about this more strategically. So what are Black Swans? Okay, let me see. I had it all working just fine, but now my... Okay, great. What are Black Swans? Black Swans describe the high impact of the highly improbable events. Okay, so why are they called Black Swans? Because prior to the 1500s, when explorers had not been visiting Australia, all the Europeans thought that the swans were all white. And once they discovered black swans, they were quite surprised about that black swans existed. Okay, so black swans are extreme events that have a high impact of low probability events. So they have a high impact, but ex ante, they're extremely low probability. They're hard to predict beforehand. They're basically a knowledge problem. And the world has become much more complex and adaptive system, independent, which makes black swan events possibly more likely. So let me give you a couple of examples of black swan events. There is, I don't know why my mouse is not working properly. World War I was a black swan event. It completely took the world by surprise. That a small event, a confluence led to World War I, and then, of course, we know it led to World War II and other atrocities. The Black Thursday, leading to the Great Depression, and within 3 years, the stock market fell by 90%, and it took 10 years into an economic slump. The world was throughout the Great Depression. Black Monday, 1987, the stock market dropped by 22%. The fall of the Berlin Wall was a high impact black swan event, which then also led to the collapse of the USSR. So the USSR appeared very strong and disappeared basically overnight, all black swan events. 9/11, we just had the unfortunate 20th anniversary of this event. And the Indian Ocean earthquake, tsunami, which led to the meltdown in Fukushima, of the reactors in 2011. COVID-19, black swan event, as we were pretty much caught unprepared. And so the question is, what will be next? Okay. This is also closely related to my own research on discontinuities that I've been working on for many years. So let's put a wrap around this a bit. What's the black swan problem? It's an outlier. It's an extreme outlier. It has extreme impact. It is highly improbable an event, low probability, extreme impact, and is explainable only after the fact. It's also then, if you look at this, it's a problem of induction. So if you think about the turkey gets fed every day, people are nice to the turkey, it's taken care of, healthcare is provided and everything. Just a day before Thanksgiving, he is prepared into a meal. So that's a black swan event, right? He didn't know that this would be coming. So, and thinking back to humans, our human nature fools us into believing that we should have known about the impending problem all along. So it's a big problem in terms of forecasting the future based on what we know from the past. The past is finite and known. The future possibilities are infinite and unknown. So it's not linear progression when you look forward, as for example, as is pointed out when you read any prospectus in trying to make stock market investments. So this links directly to the first strategic concept that we talk about in class, which is strategic decision making. And the second important concept is the strategy process. Okay, so if you think about why are black swans such a big problem, because we know from strategic decision making that we have basically two systems that we use to make decisions, system 1 and system 2. System 1 is the fast, unconscious, automatic, everyday snap decisions. That's what Malcolm Gladwell wrote about it in Blink, error-prone hierarchy of biases. System 2, we have to sit back. It's slow, conscious, effortful, complex, analytical decisions, more reliable, lower likelihood of biases. The problem is that we like system 1. We like the autopilot. This is our dominant way to think about the world. And with this, we often then fall prey to other cognitive biases, which make the impact of black swans so problematic. Confirmation bias, right? We reason from the known to the unknown. Okay, this looks like the flu. Can't be much worse, right? Or a lot of billionaires, Gates, Zuckerberg, Jobs, are college dropouts, but not all college dropouts are billionaires, right? So that's a reason by analogy. We have many other biases that plague our decision making, which explains the problems we have in understanding and comprehending black swans. The illusion of control. All right, this may be happening in a developing country. It won't be happening in the United States. This may be happening with this company. It won't be happening here, and so forth, right? Representativeness, right? We had other scares like SARS and MERS. Nothing happened, so this will be the same thing, right? And then, of course, our old friend of groupthink, where we all coalesce around a leader. And we've seen groupthink in many areas, not just in politics, but in science and many other areas where we didn't expect it, right? So a lot of biases, things like are found in stories like overnight success, 20 years in the making, right? Sports, academia, artists, because it's all about extreme events. So let's go a bit further and look at this in terms of how to make sense of all this, how to solve this information problem. And here the matrix by Donald Rumsfeld, the former defense secretary of the United States, who just passed on this past summer, is quite useful. So he had a penchant for talking about known and unknowns, right? And he developed this 2x2 matrix where he goes through these 4 possibilities, right? The known knowns, things we understand and are aware of. I know mathematics, I know a little bit of physics. We're pretty comfortable in these areas, right? Things we know but are unknown. Things we are aware of but don't understand. So I know that the cosmos, I know it expands, but I don't know why this is all happening, right? And then we move to the unknown knowns, right? Things we understand, but not yet aware of, right? So we would understand that the laws of physics, but we don't understand, we're not aware that they may hold at other places or may not, right? And then finally, it's the unknown unknowns, which is the big problem, the big black swans that we're looking at, right? So here is the black swans, the unknown unknowns, basically things we neither are aware of nor understand, right? And we also talk about gray swans, which things that are unknown but can be known, right? So known knowns, the top left corners are facts, realities. Known unknowns, there's a solution, but I have to learn it. Unknown unknowns is intuition, and black swans are unknown unknowns that have strong impact. So the issue need to be how to transform these unknown unknowns into known unknowns, right? Or why do black swans have an extreme impact? Because the world has moved to closely tied systems, complex adaptive systems that are linked very tightly, right? If you look at organizations, you can see that we have optimized in a fashion, basically we do exactly what we teach in business school, just-in-time delivery, optimal inventory management, and so forth. And what this has created is a very tightly knit system of mastery of fit of activities, which break apart if there's changes that are forced upon the system, such as a black swan event, right? So we set up an organization, we have mastery of and fit with the current environment, we measure success by financial metrics, and we structure and put systems in place to accommodate this, which then leads to inertia or fragility, which then is challenged when we have shifts like faster growth, business models, new markets, but also technology shocks or shocks like black swans that come upon the system. Okay, so how do we can scan for black swans? Is there any way to look at those ex ante beforehand, right? One way to think about is they would be showing up in a pestle environment analysis in the outer ring, right? That will be the first indications that they may show up. So this is quite useful to think about this is not in a task environment, but in the general environment of the firm in the outer ring where they would show up. Let me give an example. So late 2019, early 2020, when the first reports of this pneumonia-like flu symptoms out of Wuhan, China came to the United States, we all believe what we're told in the sense that there's no human-to-human transmission and there's a few isolated cases. Taiwan has had a stronger impact of SARS many years before, and they actually used kind of a pastel scanning and looked at social media messages on WeChat and concluded that this is more severe than what the news media reports in China or in the US. Moreover, I also have received a text message from a colleague of mine from China who said this is much more severe than what people talk about. So there's ways to look at this in terms of social media chatter and so forth. And then Taiwan actually sent physicians to Wuhan in early January, where they confirmed that this was human-to-human transmission long before many other countries knew that, or the WHO had told us that, and so that they could prepare accordingly. Okay, so what does that mean? The one way I like to talk with my students about these events is in terms of impact and probability, right? So the big problem is forecasting the future on what we know from the past. As said, the past is finite and unknown, the future possibilities are infinite and unknown. So if the impact is low, I don't need to care much about what's going on. It could be low or high probability, right? But this particular content we're talking about right here, the Black Swan strategy, really deals with the high impact of low probability events, upper left corner, and versus the high impact of high probability events, which we can prepare for well, right? So implementation of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act was a high probability event, as was discussed, and the impact was high and companies could prepare accordingly. And then we have these black swans on the left top corner, which are much more difficult to plan for. Okay, so what does that mean for the strategy process, right? We know there's basically three standard ways: top-down, scenario planning, and strategies plan emergence. Okay, so we can see immediately that the top-down strategic planning approach will make these problems we encounter with black swans worse, because we have a top-down decision making. It is slow. It is works well in a stable environment, but it doesn't work well when there's a shock to the system, right? We also know that the strategy plan emergence may work better if there is incremental shocks to the system, incremental innovation, but not well for big shocks like a black swan. Here, perhaps we want to think about scenario planning, right, as the appropriate business model, the appropriate, strategy process, how to think about this. So we have multiple scenarios, we develop strategic plans, and then we execute a dominant plan. Here, the important point is that we need to develop downside plans for contingency planning for black swan events. And this goes back to our friends of cognitive biases, where we also know that managers and all of us do not like to plan for bad events, for a bad future. And so we really have to force ourselves moving into system two thinking to plan for events that are and visits in areas that are not comfortable, right? So what are some of the takeaways? And I want to spend a few more minutes wrapping this up because I look forward to your Q&A. So what are some of the takeaways to how to navigate Black Swan events, right? So Black Swan strategy, do not attempt to predict the next Black Swan, but rather prepare for its impact, right? So put some kind of anti-fragile system in place rather than the system I showed earlier, which is highly fragile, tightly coordinated, tightly knit system, which will break apart when there's pressure put on. So things like cash is king, right? Apple, I think, sits on $150 billion in cash or more. Personal rule of thumb is you want to keep a 3 months rainy fund. I share with my students. Redundancies and buffers, right? We now have seen the problems in supply chains as they get optimized. There was no redundancy. There was no second source supplier. There were no buffers. Even today, I go to the supermarket, I go to Walmart or wherever I go, Target, and I see empty shelves, supply chain issues that are not completely resolved for a number of issues, labor shortages, supply shortages, raw materials, and so forth, okay? Independence, so all the big tech companies basically stand to gain from the crisis because they operate more or less independently. And obviously, startups like Zoom and Xamit have a tail dog have benefited, right? And in a digital world, they can be more or less execute regardless from the realities in the physical world. You want to have some kind of insurance for these downside events to be able to function. So the question I often hear then from my students is, when will we go back to normal? Sorry to say, we will never go back to the old normal of the fall of 2019. Schumpeterian churn and creative destruction has accelerated with these shocks, such as COVID-19. And the only option we have when we hit these strategic inflection points, this is any growth model of thinking about this, is to accept change, adjust the methods to move to a self-reinforcing success process. So we have to overcome this dissonance gap in our cognitive abilities, or we can reject change, maintain status quo, initiate decline in a self-reinforcing failure, right? So this is on his book, from his book, Only the Paranoid Survive. A strategic inflection point is a time in the life of a business or a person when its fundamentals are about to change. That change can mean an opportunity to rise to new heights, but it may just as likely signal the beginning of the end. All right, so what does that mean for students? So I often apply strategy through a lens that I call my strategy, meaning what's each person's strategies, what's the strategy of each student, what can they learn from it? So what I ask students to think about is, what does this crisis expect of me? Okay, rather, why is this happening to me? Make investments in your human capital, right? And I ask my students, are you a stock or a bond? Are you willing to take higher risks and volatility, or are you looking for constant interest payments and a less volatility? Okay. I also remind them that every crisis bears opportunity. Entrepreneurship, we've seen the numbers of new businesses go up rapidly. Many will fail, but some will succeed. And I also remind them that you need to buy or make investments when it feels worse, as you have the biggest upside ahead of you. Okay. All right. Some of the readings that this content is based on, of course, Nassim Taleb's book, The Black Swan: The Impact of the Highly Improbable. I highly recommend this book. It is part of an Incerto series where he published 5 books. So Nassim Nicholas Taleb's Incerto series is about dealing with matters of probability, complexity, and risk. The books underline that everything becomes more and more interconnected and entangled, basically this tightly connected system I showed you earlier, requiring an altogether different approach to knowledge and revision of our habitual ways of thinking about certain things, such as how to manage for future events. I will be happy and I will share my slides with you after this presentation. Here's my email address if you like to get in touch with me directly. And before I conclude, I'd like to comment and thank you again for your time. It's interesting to see, right, in the survey questions we did at the beginning, 50% of the teaching will be done hybrid. At this point, it's done hybrid, and only 12% full residential, 38% online. So even post-COVID, which I think will really not happen until next year, we will still keep some elements such as a hybrid teaching method as students demand it, and it will help universities to scale some of the courses that we need to be scaling. And it's also interesting to see that about half, the question is, has your content changed or will it change? It depends a bit, of course, on the social subject matter, but also I always find it fascinating. I look at my potential content revisions based on the questions I get from my students, and that's how I open my comments. So my students have been asking me how to make sense of this. How do I apply strategic concepts? Please help us to think through these issues. So I think the methodology of our teaching is powerful if we can use the frameworks and concepts to help students make sense out of information overload or crisis situations that are in. And so again, thank you for your time. Thank you for coming on a Friday afternoon. And again, thank you to McGraw-Hill, Debbie Claire, and Natalie King, and others for making this workshop possible. Debbie, time is now yours. I think we have about 14, 15 minutes left for some Q&A.
Yeah, you're doing great, Frank. And thank you so much for that stimulating discussion. I do see a question that has come into chat from David, and he has, how should we make scenario plans as a public university when some of our operating decisions are determined by political entities?
Great question, and very loaded question as we are just going through this ourselves. So I'll make a couple of comments. What we learned at Georgia Tech, and so Georgia Tech is part of the University System of Georgia, which reports to the Board of Regents, and the Board of Regents reports to the governor. So our faculty and president tried to have some rules in place that were different from what the governor wanted to do, and we learned it did not. It doesn't work. So what do you do, right? So complex adaptive systems are usually, you have decisions by individuals at the bottom up, right? So basically, you will have to stick with what was given to you by your supervisors, in a sense, by your last source of power, in this case, the governor, in our case. However, I think we had some leeway on the operational level how to do this, right? In terms of pedagogy. So the survey question was interesting: hybrid, residential only, and online only. Initially, we were asked to teach in the classroom and stream at the same time, and basically prepare two kinds of lectures, but do it simultaneously, which actually created a problem because it was the most inferior solution. Which helped us the most is having in-person contact when allowed, but then also having parts that were online only. So basically, you got to operate within your constraints, and need to make adjustments on the operating level, I guess. Yes.
David, thank you so much for that question. I see another question for you, Frank. This is from Dennis. What do you tell students on how to evaluate a company and their preparation for Black Swan events for employment purposes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So employment placement, obviously one of the biggest the biggest motivator for students. That's why they go to college and they want to fulfill their professional dreams. At the beginning of my semester of my course, I have a whole section on future industries. I tell them the story. So Mike Duke, the former CEO of Walmart, is a Georgia Tech graduate, and he gave a talk to our students, and he was asked how did he become CEO and so successful. At this point, was the company with the largest number of employees in the United States, 2.1 million. I still think Walmart is still number one and Amazon number two. But at any rate, he said, I was lucky. When I graduated in the late 60s and early 70s, retail was just taken off. And big box retail was a completely new concept just about to come. So he basically said, I positioned myself at the beginning of the wave of this industry, at the first hour, so to speak. So he said he was very humble. He said he rode the wave of the industry, right? So I talked to my students about future industries, healthcare, sustainable energy, AI, artificial intelligence. We talk about what impact will that have, so that my students start thinking about industries that are around and productive and provide opportunities for the next 20, 30, 40 years, right? That is one way to think about it. Another one to think about is, of course, competitive analysis is how many buffers do these firms have, right? As the large firms usually struggle less. Are they cash rich and so forth than versus a mom and pop stores, right? Where they got basically wiped out. If you think about restaurants, hair salons, nail studios. So the small service businesses struggle, boutique consulting firms in these kind of crises, right? Final comment on this, we also know from entrepreneurship research that the most successful entrepreneurs actually start working with large companies first and then spin out doing their startups. So these are some of the things I discuss with my students at the beginning of the semester to help them orient themselves to think about in the bigger picture rather than I want to work for company X or Y, to think about the more macro picture in terms of industries and economies. Thank you.
And Dennis said thank you back as well, Frank. It looks like we have one additional question that came in separately. Do all black swans exacerbate inequality?
I missed that second, but do all black swans
Exacerbate inequality?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know.
And that was from Dwight.
Yes, that's a great question. I haven't looked at this. It's definitely something to think about, right? And it appears that way. But I haven't read anything about it or seen research about it. But I will think about this and make a note of that. Okay, I think it's important, and I appreciate you raising it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dwight. Other questions from the lovely attendees that are on? I'm just getting some good responses that was great. So that's good, Frank. Are there any examples of other black swans that you all discussed in the classroom? Mortgage meltdown. COVID definitely showed the impact of inequality. Semiconductor shortage. Any strategic tools that you could use to share with us so that we could share with our students, was by Melina.
Strategic tools, yeah, I will share the frameworks and concepts I discussed today with you as a PDF deck. And of course, there's more tools in my textbook that may be useful. Melina, it's a very important point, because what students find most helpful is if we help them to use frameworks and concepts to make sense out of the world. Black swans are just one example, right? But to show them these are not just abstract concepts, but they actually help them to make better decisions, right? So when I was a student, information was scarce. We had to go to the library and find books, or the best thing we had later on was LexisNexis. Today's students and us as teachers, we are having an information overload, right? Bombarded from all sides on a varying quality. So students need to make sense of these situations, right? So the impact of blockchain. Earlier was, so I'll also talk about things like blockchain or individual investing. I talk about Robinhood and the GameStop scenario. So we talk about lots of different things that are current and interest my students, but we use frameworks and concepts that have stood the test of time to help them think about this. And this is precisely what managers ought to do, right? They're supposed to apply some kind of frameworks and concepts to make them on average better decision makers.
Thank you as well. Dennis said Pestle is a great tool for industry analysis, but external viewing is not always the norm in the real world.
Dennis, I couldn't agree more. So actually I talk with my students about strategy 1.0 and strategy 2.0. I share with them, I've worked as a consultant myself in industry, and I shared with them that if businesses just would do what we think it's a good solution, they would be so much better. Strategy 1.0. Strategy 2.0 is like, so strategy 1.0 is a reactive approach, but trying to be best in class. Strategy 2.0 is you create a change for others. Apple's iPhone forced changes in other industries and by other competitors, right? So you want to be creating a change for others. And yes, are we doing what we're doing? That are we all we do we could probably not, otherwise consulting wouldn't be a multi-billion-dollar industry, which is precisely using our content we teach in the classroom and make it more applicable to companies and executives.
And Frank, I think that kind of leads into this question from another instructor, Banerjee. If employers need people who can handle virtual work environments in the future, could it affect curriculum design at the university level?
I think the answer is unambiguously yes, it will. Inequality was brought up earlier. One reason of inequality is that we limit access to many of the top universities, not for the lack of good students, but we want this to be exclusive, which helps in the rankings. We just saw the last few weeks rankings coming out and a lot of soul searching again. And so what the online environment allows us to do is, and half of you teach in hybrid, is to scale. So rather than me teaching to 85 students or you teaching to 50 students, you could teach 500 students or 5,000. So I think the answer is absolutely yes. I think what will be here to stay is a hybrid environment where some content will be online, and the hybrid goes hand in hand with what we call the flipped classroom, where you move the content outside the classroom and then spend in-class time on the high value added. But it also helps in terms of addressing access to education in scaling it. And the only way to scale it, to publish lectures, if you will, is to go online.
See one other comment. Is strategy 3.0 coming?
I think strategy 3.0 is coming, and it is coming in the forms of AI. Artificial intelligence is coming in the form of a new rejigging of global superpower relationship between the United States and China. So I think there's a lot of potentials for Black Swans to come visit us in the future.
Well, we've got 2 minutes left. Are there last questions? Sorry, Frank.
Artificial intelligence and machine learning will affect all aspects of our lives. And it will affect our students' career prospects. It will affect the way work is done. What you've seen over the last 18 months was that we basically pulled the future 10 years forward. So we accelerate all those changes that were already in place. Online shopping, if you think about it, now it's standard. Also, Shopify, for example, has allowed companies like Nike or other brands going directly to consumer. Heinz ketchup, you can buy Heinz ketchup directly from Heinz. So we will see a ton of changes. Healthcare, artificial intelligence, machine learning, not to mention the economic and political challenges in the US-China relationship.
Another is what will not change is a skill to be flexible and embrace change.
Absolutely. In addition, if I may add, and to make investments into human capital, continued learning, continuous learning.
Agree. Well, I think that wraps our session for today. I want to thank you so much, Frank, for sharing your thoughts on Black Swans and strategy. Look forward to your future talks as well. And then we will be sending information as follow-up with your recording today. So thanks to everyone and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend. And thanks for coming. Appreciate it.